Hello and welcome to another episode of Sustainability in Your Ear, the Earth911 podcast. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, your host, and today we have another innovator interview. Brett Kugelmass, who is the managing director of the Washington, D.C.-based Energy Impact Center, delivered a talk that I saw at the American Climate Leadership Conference a couple of months back, and it was a really fascinating argument, both that we have to reduce carbon in the atmosphere by actually removing it, and the power source that he proposes using to do so, which is nuclear power. Brett, welcome to the show. Let's talk about these ideas. Let's start off with, what is carbon capture? Our audience is familiar with it, but why don't you tell us what it is so anybody who's new can catch up?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mitch. Well, I guess maybe first let me talk about why carbon capture is important, and then we can actually talk about the mechanisms to do so. Mm-hmm. So basically, what people often ignore in the climate debate is that what we're really trying to do is reduce the amount of heat that we're adding to our system. Mm-hmm. Right? And even if we level off new carbon emissions, and I mean totally level them off, like zero carbon emissions in every single sector, transportation, electricity, industry, building, heat, you name it, mm-hmm. we're still going to be adding heat to the system because we already put 1,000 gigatons of CO2 into the air over the last couple hundred years.
So essentially 1 trillion tons of carbon is up there.
Yeah. And we need to remove that if we want to stop adding heat to the system. Mm-hmm. So that is the most important thing that people have to realize, is that it is not enough to just completely zero out emissions, which pretty much no one has a plan to do anyway, but we have to actually go negative, and not just a little bit negative, but rapidly negative. Mm-hmm. To get rid of that 1,000 gigatons of CO2. Otherwise, we haven't solved climate change. We've just maybe delayed it a few years.
So, and let's just put that in the plainest possible way. Carbon dioxide is like a heat sponge, and we've wrapped our planet in a heat sponge of an extra 1 trillion tons of carbon, or carbon dioxide. So we need to pull that out of the atmosphere in addition to reaching zero emissions, in order to preserve the environment that our grandparents would have known.
Well, what's actually kind of interesting is that if you can remove carbon at a faster rate than you add it, you actually don't need to zero out your emissions at all. You can keep on emitting as long as you're removing faster. And that often goes unacknowledged as well, because people don't like that. People think, oh, well, that'll just give the polluters license to keep polluting. But we have to remember why we don't like the pollution. We don't like the pollution because we're adding CO2 to the air. If you can remove it at a faster rate than you add it, that's okay.
And, you know, I agree with you. I think we treat this moral hazard of taking carbon out of the air as something that would discourage people from reducing their carbon dioxide output too seriously, in the sense that if we are not considering all the options, as well as the fact that we may ultimately continue to produce some carbon, but that we have the capacity to pull it out of the atmosphere, in a sense, we create an air conditioning system that will allow us to continue in some ways, for instance, the production of plastic that I think people generally agree we will need, this doesn't have to be the end of all carbon emissions. On the other hand, we do need to reduce our carbon dramatically in order to achieve even the goal of stopping the heating. And then we have to pull all the extra atmospheric carbon out, making it a twofold problem, and we're trying to treat it with one silver bullet.
Well, something I just want to clarify there, because I think this is super duper important. Mm-hmm. You are not going to stop heating until you've pulled it all out.
Exactly.
If you pull out 900 out of 1,000 gigatons, so let's say we do the greatest job we could ever imagine. We go negative, we go rapid negative, but we only pull out 900 out of those 1,000 gigatons that we already added. We're still going to be adding heat to the system.
Yep.
Every single year. It's still going to get hotter and hotter every year. And the things that we don't like about climate change are caused by heat. So it's super important to remember, heat will not stop. We'll not stop adding heat to the system until we removed all 1,000 gigatons of CO2 that we added. Now, and just to be clear, that doesn't mean we're removing all CO2 from the atmosphere. The atmosphere had a healthy amount of CO2 in it in 1750. We just need to go back to the rates in 1750.
Right. And so now that's the paradox that you identified in your speech. The fact that no matter what we do with regards to reduction, we're still stuck with the atmospheric CO2 that's in place. So how did you go about this transition from a life in Silicon Valley to starting the organization that you run now, the Energy Impact Center?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate enough to, throughout my 20s, get to just kind of fool around and do whatever I wanted with interesting technologies. So I started a robotics company shortly after I got my master's at Stanford, which pretty much makes you an entrepreneur. So I ran that company for about 5 years. It was acquired in 2017, and I decided the only thing I wanted to do was work on climate change from that point forward. So at first, it kind of started off just pretty, let me just talk to some people, see what's happening, try to get a different perspective, try to cut through some of the media, what I'm reading, and see what's real, what's not real. And then it just became more and more formal as I got more and more serious about it. So I realized San Francisco wasn't really the right place to get things started. So I moved out to DC, created the Energy Impact Center. We've made some terrific hires out here and across the country, and we're a much more formal organization now that conducts research on deep decarbonization.
As you have learned more about decarbonization, you've identified direct air capture as one of the most effective ways to do this. Why is that the best way to go, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I mean, you really only have two options to remove CO2 from the air. You can do it with biological machines, or you can do it with mechanical machines, right? But somehow we have to force the capture of the CO2. Now, if you look at the best examples of biological machines that we have that capture CO2, well, that's photosynthesis, that's trees, and that's other plants that remove it. And trees have done, yes, and yeah, exactly. And so trees have done a pretty good job removing and trapping CO2 in a stable form. They create hydrocarbons, right? And they create other molecular forms of that carbon that are more stable and stay out of the air. Unless, the old trees kept it out of the air for a while because they didn't rot and they were just kind of buried under hundreds of millions of years of soil. And that's where all of our oil under the ground came from.
Right.
Trees nowadays, since we have other bacteria and fungi that decompose them, they're good at sequestering carbon for 100 years, maybe a couple hundred years if you add arsenic or other poisons or heavy metals to it, which we don't really want to do. So trees aren't as good as they used to be at permanent sequestration of carbon, but they're still a pretty good solution up until a certain point. The reason that I turned to direct air capture through mechanical machines as being the only path forward is I ran the numbers. And I said, what if you were to plant every square inch on the planet, not even just every available inch, every square inch of land on the planet with trees, and grow them as fast as you can? Would that be enough to remove the 1,000 gigatons of CO2 from the air? And it didn't even come close. So, it's just biological capture of carbon is just not fast enough. But mechanical capture of carbon, in theory, could scale as high as you wanted to if you had a pretty much infinite and abundant energy source.
Well, and that's where we get into, I think, what will be a challenging question for some of our listeners. But your proposal is to use nuclear energy, and you make an interesting and compelling case in that speech, which of course we'll be linking to in the introduction to this podcast. But today we've got 98 plants, I believe, in the United States running, with a couple more that are commissioned and being built. And you talk in terms of the absolute absence of damage from meltdowns, and they happen sometimes. Tell us about what you found. You make several key points about the actual danger we face from nuclear.
Yeah, well, first let me, I guess, describe how I got to nuclear. Once again, I was just running the math like I did with the trees. Hey, if we planted every square inch of trees, would it be enough? I did the same with renewables as well. And I just looked at their carbon footprint. I looked at every energy source that wasn't fossil based. And I said, whether it's hydro or renewables or nuclear or tidal, whatever it is, each of these things has a carbon footprint too.
Right.
So in order for it to be a viable solution for permanent sequestration, you have to say, okay, well, what's the energy requirement to capture a kilogram of CO2? And how many kilograms of CO2 are released in the production of any given unit of energy from that system?
Right.
And the only one that wasn't ruled out just from a pure mathematical basis was nuclear. And now I didn't, have any real opinion in nuclear. I thought, okay, there's this waste issue, there's this safety issue. Those are probably just all engineering, so things that could be fixed with engineering. So I worked at a solar company. It was my first job, so I love solar. I still love offshore wind. It's not mathematically feasible to do this with offshore wind, but offshore wind's still pretty cool, and it's pretty good.
So how much energy do we need to pull that trillion tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, do you estimate?
Yeah, I mean, so in terms of, I can't give it to you in terms of units of energy because there's still some assumptions you have to make, but in terms of like approximate units of power, we're talking on the order of tens of thousands of gigawatts. So like the largest, plants built are like a gigawatt, the largest power plants built. And we would need tens of thousands of new nuclear gigawatt scale plants, or the equivalent. You could have hundreds of thousands of ones that are 1/10 the size, or millions of them that are 1/100th the size. So yeah.
How small can a nuclear plant be, based on that statement?
Well, there's one in there's one in Oak Ridge that I saw operating that was the size of a garbage can, and it produced 80 megawatts. So imagine something the size of a garbage can that creates as much energy as not 40, but more like 160 of the largest land-based wind turbines you've ever seen. Because the land-based ones maybe have a 25% capacity factor, maybe 2 megawatts. So it's just like imagine that much stuff, and then imagine a garbage can creating that much energy. That's the power of nuclear. It's almost unbelievable.
And so do you imagine that we need to have the carbon capture infrastructure distributed all over the world, or could it be concentrated in a few places? What does that look like in your mind?
Well, I paint the picture of nuclear power at the scale of tens of thousands of gigawatts, powering direct air capture, and this could be done anywhere. This could be done centrally if you want, and then shipping carbon neutral fuels around the world, and shipping carbon negative products around the world. Or it could be done in a distributed way if you want to cut down on some of the shipping costs. But we already have this incredible infrastructure to ship hydrocarbons around the world. So, and people are used to filling up their tanks with gasoline. So the way that you want to do it, the absolute quickest way with least shock to the system, using existing infrastructure, you could just be, creating an island of synthetic hydrocarbons somewhere and shipping them around the world.
Well, that's another angle on carbon capture that we haven't discussed, and I think a lot of people don't recognize that all that carbon is the basis for fuel, cement, carbon fiber, all sorts of different things that we would be able to manufacture, given that we have 1 trillion tons of carbon to capture.
Listen, plastics are amazing. I know plastics are getting a bad rep lately for some reason. We don't want plastics in the ocean. Okay, we get it. That doesn't mean we don't want plastics. Plastics are awesome. Plastics are used in medical equipment. Plastics are used everywhere in your office. Plastics just have these incredible structural properties, and we could be building more things with plastics. And that doesn't mean it would have any adverse effect on the environment. Just don't dump them in the ocean, as we don't do in the U.S. today. It's only certain parts of the world that the plastic ends up in the ocean, and there are very known fixes for that. So don't hate plastics just because you see a few pictures of otters with a bag in their mouth.
Well, and so let's also explore a little bit the number of jobs you're talking about, because if you're talking about tens of thousands of small installations or one massive installation somewhere, you're talking about millions of jobs. And that's the other challenge a lot of people don't overcome intellectually when they think about the climate solution. They think about stopping producing as much carbon as possible, but then we need to start to use this carbon that's in the atmosphere as well as pull it out. And that produces an economic boom of itself. So how many jobs, or how much value do you think you can create if you can capture all of that carbon and turn it into something else?
Well, let me be very clear. I want to minimize the total number of jobs on a per energy basis, right? That's how we're going to make it cheap, and that's how we're going to make it cost competitive.
Basic economics.
So we pull from the ground. but the cheaper energy is, the better every other industry does. So, I mean, you'll see a huge economic boon just from cheap energy that drives job growth everywhere, even if you minimize the jobs in the energy sector, which we should do. But yeah, I mean, in the short term, yeah, if you're going to build, tens of thousands of gigawatt scale facilities or millions of, megawatt scale facilities, there are going to be a lot of construction jobs there too, or manufacturing jobs, depending on how you put it together.
Ongoing maintenance.
But I want to emphasize that our plans are trying to reduce the amount of jobs on a per unit energy basis.
And perfectly understandable, because you do want to make this into an economically viable system. So let's understand that when we talk about this kind of an installation, it does require somebody who is going to build it, as you said. It's going to require somebody who's going to run it, somebody to do the maintenance, somebody, so there are new job roles that can be developed. And these are not necessarily jobs that require a degree in nuclear physics, as I understand it.
Most jobs in a nuclear power plant don't require a degree in nuclear physics.
Yeah. So these can be blue collar and potentially middle class incomes that are tied to cleaning up our environment rather than producing more stuff that's polluting it.
Yep.
Now, you make a couple of claims during the speech that, and let me just go through them. Your point about light water nuclear reactors, where we have roughly 100 in use in the country right now, is that they can't be used to make weapons.
Yep.
Why is that?
So what often gets confused is that people think plutonium is plutonium, and plutonium is used in bombs, but plutonium is not plutonium. There are different types of plutonium. And plutonium-239 of a very high purity is what's used in bombs, and plutonium-240 essentially makes a bomb totally ineffective. The best thing to counteract the production of a plutonium bomb is plutonium-240, and light water reactors are really good at making plutonium-240.
Okay.
The type of reactors that either we used or Canada used or Russia used to make the plutonium for plutonium bombs were channel type reactors. Reactors that you could access the fuel in situ while the reactor was still going. So that's what's required to make plutonium-239 and not plutonium-240. But light water reactors are totally sealed up, and you can't access them while the reactor is running. So they're inherently proliferation proof. Now, listen, you can get into the nitty gritty and say, yeah, one can be retrofitted in this way or that way, but it's not practical. It would be easier to build a different type of reactor from scratch at that point. So your typical run-of-the-mill light water reactor, PWR, pressurized water reactor, or BWR, boiling water reactor, that we have throughout this country, effectively cannot be made to use weapons. And so I'm a big fan of that technology.
Now, you also talk about the fact that nuclear waste hasn't actually hurt anybody or anything in history. And I actually really don't agree with that. I know people personally who have been impacted by groundwater pollution from Hanford.
Okay, so let me just draw a distinction.
Okay.
When I was talking about nuclear waste, I was talking about nuclear waste from power plant production, not from nuclear weapons production.
Okay.
So you always have to keep that distinction in mind.
Great. Okay. Got it. Now, so there are instances of nuclear waste from weapons production that have been damaging to folks.
Yeah, but I don't want any more nuclear weapons. Like, I'm very anti-nuclear weapons. So it almost doesn't factor into the climate change conversation.
And frankly, I have been most of my life against nukes as a result of those kinds of experiences. I have a grandfather who died because he was a downwinder. Yeah.
How old are you, Mitch?
58.
Yeah. So that your generation, your generation the environmental movement was like very, very much tied up into the anti-nuclear weapon movement.
That's where it started.
Yeah. So it's very easy to see why when certain environmental groups come, even like, I'm 32. So a lot of the environmental groups I deal with today.
Kid, that's all. Just lecturing your seniors. That's what you're doing.
Well, there's a lot of people at my age who work at these environmental organizations, and they've got this anti-nuke perspective. And I realize that it's like just so built into the culture of these organizations, the cultural team
exactly.
organizations, because of that initial, intersection point. But it's like when you dig a little bit deeper, you find it just doesn't hold up.
So in the last 3 meltdowns, you talk about this in the speech as well. Nobody died.
Yeah, so Fukushima 1, Fukushima 2, and Fukushima 3, they were gigawatt scale reactors that in the when there was that tsunami,
right,
in Japan, tsunami and earthquake. I mean, this is one of the greatest tsunami earthquake combination civilization's ever seen.
And a lot of people died in the tsunami.
20,000 people died in the tsunami. 0 people died from nuclear. Zero.
With shows like Chernobyl on HBO right now, I think it's HBO, does that make it harder to have this conversation?
I don't know. Like, the show didn't get things wrong. Like, the show definitely got things wrong, right? But they got a lot right, too. And it was like very dramatic TV and got a lot of people talking about it. I mean, I generally am of the side that dialogue and conversation is a good thing no matter what. And so even if, people come into it from the wrong perspective, it gives you the opportunity to, take their interest and correct their perspective, or, just offer a different opinion. Maybe you're wrong too, but either way, it gets the dialogue going. So, I like when there's more people talking about it, more people discussing. I think that's healthy. So I'm not against the show Chernobyl at all, even though, I got my call.
Well, it's even really a matter of against or for. It's more, it's that does that kind of a cultural event change the ability for us to think clearly about what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, I think one thing that goes unacknowledged in the Chernobyl conversation, because listen, it is very emotional, right? Like, nobody likes an accident. People died, not good. But if that accident happened the exact same way today, literally same type of reactor, however it was handled, still blew up. Even the Chernobyl reactor, which was this graphite channel type reactor, different characteristics, and I'm not advocating for it all. But if it happened today, probably nobody would have died even there, because they wouldn't have sent the firemen into the reactor core where they got burned from direct dose of radiation. That just wouldn't have happened. And then, the surrounding communities that, had this iodine uptake in their thyroid and got cancer, mostly children, that wouldn't have happened either, for 2 reasons. One, they would have just told them, hey, don't drink the cow milk. Like, don't drink the local cow milk, and no one would have gotten hurt. That's it. They just didn't know, and they weren't told. But that's all they had to do. They didn't have to kill the cows. And it was only for like a month. If it's like, don't drink the cow milk for a month, there would have been no problems to the surrounding communities.
Okay.
Or actually, what's even crazier? If it happened in the US or other more developed areas, we have iodized salt. And so they would have had enough iodine 127, normal iodine, in their thyroid, that it wouldn't have even taken up the iodine 131, which gave them the cancer. So they probably could have even drank the cow milk today and been fine.
Yeah, I remember Chernobyl, and we ate iodized salt in order to avoid any exposure.
Yeah, well, we all have iodized salt now. I mean, unless you get like kosher salt or something, everyone's got iodized salt.
So now let's look a little bit more at the very right now. Nuclear, if I remember the number correctly, is about 31% of U.S. energy production from those 100 plants. The National Renewable Energy Council or laboratory said that solar has the ability to potentially generate 400,000 terawatts of power a year. And you're talking about something on the order of half that needed to, based on what we've been speaking about, to do the carbon capture project. And of course, then this provides clean power in a lot of other contexts as well. It doesn't all have to go into carbon capture over the long term. The investment can be amortized across consumer use and industrial use and so forth. How does this initial massive investment, because 10,000 nuclear plants isn't cheap, how do we put together a business approach that will allow us to attack the initial problem, take that trillion tons of carbon out of the atmosphere, and then start to completely replace the fossil fuel-based energy production as well? Where do we go from here, I guess, is the simplest way to put that question.
Well, I claim that if this is going to happen at all, you've got to do it profitably. Like, there's no amount of money in the world that could make this work, because the government wants to spend the money on other things. We've got other priorities too. We're not going to spend hundreds of trillions of dollars combating climate change when we've got other sorts of poverty and air pollution and so many other things to deal with. It's just like totally unrealistic. So I claim that you've got to make the solution to climate change profitable. And if you do make it profitable, it's going to happen real fast. So it's a win-win there. And in order to make it profitable, all you have to do is make carbon neutral fuels and carbon negative products cheaper than their carbon positive counterparts. And then market forces will literally solve climate change for you. Increased consumption, increased prosperity will solve climate change. It's a perfect alignment of individual consumption and individual short-term habits and needs and wants and long-term global preservation. That's what you want. That's the rule we should be setting for these systems if we realistically expect this to happen. And I claim that only nuclear can get energy so cheap that you can make these carbon negative products cheaper than their carbon positive alternatives.
And does that include being able to store whatever wastes are left over afterwards? Does that factor into that calculation?
What wastes?
Well, I assume that a fission reactor produces some kind of waste at the end of the day.
Yeah. So remember that whole thing about how that garbage can was inside? Okay. So when you release energy inside of an atom, it contains, on a per mass basis, 3 million times as much energy than any chemical system. Okay, that means 3 million times less waste. So, if we can deal with the amount of tennis shoes that we produce every year and put in a landfill somewhere, that's more than enough to deal with thousands and thousands of years of nuclear waste in terms of mass and volume of stuff that you're going to be handling. So it's just such an inconsequentially small amount of stuff for the energy that you have to produce.
Right.
It's not even an issue.
Okay, so no need for carbon pricing because it operates purely on the price advantage of inexpensive power to produce carbon negative or carbon neutral materials.
And by the way, carbon pricing wouldn't work anyway because you can't price previous emissions and you can't stop climate change without addressing previous emissions. So this whole
you can't address them without acknowledging they exist, that we have a massive debt that nobody wants to take on.
Yeah, but even if you price carbon, like you tax it, there's no mechanism by which you can tax previous companies over the last 100 years for their emissions, and that's what's going to continue to create the heat. So listen, so carbon tax is like an interesting mechanism to like change the market dynamics, but it will not deal with previous emissions, and so that's a problem.
Yeah. Okay, so but the point is that we don't need to get into an elaborate carbon taxation model. We don't. You see this as a purely basic economics issue of bringing inexpensive, clean power. The cleanliness is the thing people will debate, but that will solve our in-place carbon problem as well as help us lower our overall emissions.
Yep.
And that's a pretty straightforward, and that's why this talk caught a lot of attention. I'm glad that we spoke about it.
Yeah, thanks for showing your interest. Really appreciate it.
Listen, we'd love to keep up on this discussion. The next step, and if there are things happening, please let us know. I know our listeners are looking for a lot of different options in their future, and if we can help inform them in various ways, we'd love to do it.
Anytime, Mitch.
All right. Thank you, Brett. Brett Kugelmass is the managing director of the Washington, D.C.-based Energy Impact Center. And again, we'll be pointing to his speech at the American Climate Leadership Conference in the introduction to this podcast. So we urge you to take a look at it and think about these ideas. As Earth911 has long said, more ideas results in less waste. And we believe that every idea needs to be discussed at this point because we are at the decision time for our climate. So thanks, Brett, for joining us. And we'll be talking to all of you soon. This is Earth 911's Sustainability in Your Ear. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe, and we'll talk to you soon.